The morning light filtered through the curtains, and the remnants of an unbearable headache forced me out of bed. I staggered to the bathroom, swallowed 2 aspirins, and leaned over the sink, hoping my queasy stomach would settle. I'm Ron Jensen, and yesterday my world turned upside down. After a long day at work, I walked into our home, unaware of the emotional devastation waiting for me. Chrissy, my wife, looked at me with a mixture of love and sadness. She confessed she had been involved with another man for the past year. She described their relationship as a lifeline for him, a man shattered by a car accident that claimed his wife's life while he walked away unscathed. Chrissy explained how she tried to mend his broken spirit, how their connection deepened into love, and eventually physical intimacy. She assured me that her feelings for me hadn't changed and promised she'd come back when this man no longer needed her. She swore she would still be there for our kids and for me, balancing her life between our family and her obligation to this man, whom she believed would eventually move on. Her revelation felt like a punch to the gut. In my dazed state, I reacted with fury, calling her names in a futile attempt to make sense of the betrayal. Chrissy's response was sharp. She accused me of not truly loving or supporting her, throwing our wedding vows back in my face. She argued that if I loved her, I would accept this situation, painful as it was. The conversation left me drowning in a storm of emotions, questioning everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and marriage. Chrissy was clearly disappointed and angry with me. I was furious, and to avoid doing something I'd regret, I started drinking and shouting. Once I calmed down a bit, I asked her how she'd feel if I found another woman. "Who would want a guy like you, Ron?" She sneered. "You're a middle-aged man, overweight with thinning hair." She warned me that if I tried to divorce her, she'd ruin me. I was furious and confused, unable to think clearly. I kept drinking, consumed with rage towards Chrissy. Eventually, she packed a bag and said, "I'm going to stay with my friend until you calm down and accept the situation." I don't remember much after that. Sitting on our bed, I decided to take stock of my life. Chrissy was right. I was middle-aged, my hair was thinning, and I was about 20 pounds overweight. I couldn't change my age, but I could do something about my hair and my weight. First, I needed to figure out where my kids were. It was Saturday morning, so they should have been home. After searching the house, I realized they weren't there. Where had Chrissy taken them? I was about to call her parents when I heard a car pulling into the driveway. It was Chrissy's car, and I saw our kids getting out. I met Chrissy at the door. "Are you sober?" she snapped. "Where were the kids?" I asked. "They were with me. I couldn't leave them with you." "You didn't take them to your friend's house, did you?" I whispered. "Watch your language," she snapped again. "They were already there. My friend is kind, unlike you. I didn't dare leave them with you yesterday." "Fair point," I admitted. "But why didn't you take them to your parents' house?" "They weren't home," Chrissy replied as she walked inside. I followed her. "Are you staying or going back to your friend?" "Oh, Ron, stop being childish. I've told you how things are going to be. I'm not going to argue about this. The conversation is over, accept it or don't. Despite how you're acting, I still love you. When he no longer needs me, I'll come back full-time. So, what do we do now?" I struggled to keep my cool. "Right now, I'm packing some things to spend a few days with my friend until you cool off and accept the situation, and the kids." I hoped my words would shame her into staying, but it didn't work. "If you don't want to see them, call my parents. They'll take care of it." Chrissy packed another bag and left, leaving my head ready to explode. Still, I knew I had to stay strong for the kids. I wasn't going to accept Chrissy's betrayal. No self-respecting man would. After she left, I checked to make sure the kids were doing their homework. They complained, but agreed to start when I promised we'd visit Chrissy's parents afterward. The kids loved going there because Pop helped them build model cars. Chrissy's parents, Sam and Mary, lived on a small nearby farm. Sam, a retired old man, had a big workshop where they worked on cars. Sometimes, I helped too. I was a certified mechanic at the local Ford dealership. I wanted to talk to Chrissy's parents to see if they knew about her friend and to get their advice. I'd always had a good relationship with them and considered them my surrogate parents since mine lived far away. But I worried they might side with Chrissy that I checked on the kids again and realized just how much they meant to me. Ron Jr., the oldest at 16, was a football player, but not big enough for a college scholarship. Sally, 15, was a typical teenager and a great student. The youngest, Kyle, was 11, a cheerful surprise and still very much a kid. While the kids were working, I made some coffee and started a to-do list. I called my boss, Bob Clarkson, to update him on my situation. I had been working at the dealership since it opened 23 years ago, and Bob had been my boss for 15 of those years. He was understanding, having seen his own son go through a complicated divorce where his ex-wife made false accusations. "She's a cold-hearted witch," I said. "Tell me about it," Bob replied bitterly. "For a week, we were worried the police would arrest Gary. These accusations are devastating and hard to refute. The police get spooked every time a woman accuses a man. What saved Gary was his mother-in-law. When Carol told her mother that Gary had been abusive to their daughter, she thought it would destroy him. Bev, known for being ruthless but fair, immediately took her granddaughter to the doctor to check for any signs of abuse. The doctor confirmed there were none. Bev went to the police and threatened to testify against her own daughter if they pursued the charges. She also warned Carol that she'd expose her pill addiction, which would lead to her losing custody. "God bless Bev," I said, shocked at what some people would do to get their way. "Amen to that," Bob replied. "If there's anything I can do to help you, let me know. If it's within my power, I'll do it." I asked for the next week off, using personal days and vacation time. Bob agreed and even offered more time if needed. "Is there anything else?" he asked. "I need a good divorce lawyer." "That's easy," Bob said. "Use the lawyer my son hired. He destroyed Carol in court, Gary got primary custody, kept the house, and Carol has to pay child support. His name is D. Tucker. I think I have his number." Bob found D. Tucker's card after about a minute. I called his office, not expecting anyone to answer on a Saturday, but luck was on my side. Not only was Mr. Tucker there, but his secretary also told me he had a cancellation and could see me if I arrived within 30 minutes. I told the kids I had to step out for an hour and asked them to behave. I drove to Mr. Tucker's office and arrived in 20 minutes. D. Tucker was an attractive man in his early to mid-30s, with deep blue eyes and a warm smile. I was sure he earned points with female jurors. "How can I help you today?" Tucker asked as I sat down. "My wife told me yesterday that she's been cheating on me with a younger man," I said, feeling both embarrassed and angry. I explained what had happened the day before. Tucker took notes, shaking his head when I mentioned my wife claimed she still loved me but planned to keep seeing the other guy. "Let me get this straight," Tucker said, narrowing his eyes. "Your wife says she loves you but will continue seeing this guy." I nodded, embarrassed. "Okay, go on," Tucker urged. I explained how Chrissy got angry when I refused to accept her plan. I admitted I called her a few names out of frustration. I painfully recounted how Chrissy laughed when I asked how she'd feel if I found another woman. She belittled me, saying no woman would want someone like me and promised to ruin me if I tried to divorce her. "She really said all that?" Tucker asked, incredulous. "No offense, Mr. Jensen, but your wife is either incredibly insensitive or has serious mental health issues." "No offense taken," I sighed. "I think the same." Then I told him how she left the kids at her lover's house during our argument, and they spent the night there. Tucker's head shot up, and he smiled slightly as he jotted down notes. "Now, the million-dollar question, what do you want to do?" Tucker asked, folding his hands. I can't live with this situation, I replied after a moment. I don't know if I can get past this, but I don't want to be destroyed in a divorce or lose my kids. Tucker nodded understandingly. That's common when women face divorce because of their own misconduct. But I'll work hard to minimize any damage she can cause. You'll likely get less than 50% of your joint assets. Unfortunately, the courts don't care about infidelity, so you may have to pay alimony and child support. That I felt deflated despite Tucker's reassurances. It seemed like I was going to be taken to the cleaners. Yes, that's possible, Tucker said, studying his notes. But that's why we need to act fast. Your wife has left the marital home and left your kids at her lover's house, which doesn't sit well with some judges. Right now, you have custody, and we can try to keep it that way. He continued, I'll file an emergency restraining order against your wife, allowing you to stay in the house temporarily. The longer you stay, the stronger your case will be for primary custody. Does your wife work? Tucker asked. Yes, part-time at the hospital on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, I replied, then added, that's probably where she met this guy. Tucker nodded in agreement and asked how much she earned. About 25,000 pesos a year, while I make around 80,000, I said. I have to ask a crucial question, and I want you to think carefully, said Dwight, looking me directly in the eyes. Do you still love her? Do you want to try to work things out? I stared at the floor for a long time. When I finally looked up, tears were streaming down my face. I love her, but I can't accept this situation. She disrespected me and broke her vows. I just want a divorce. Last question, Dwight said, turning to a clean sheet of paper. Tell me about your assets. I quickly thought about our finances and explained. We have around 3,500 in checking, 44,000 pesos in savings, and a 20,000 peso CD. I have approximately 150,000 pesos in my 401k, while Chrissy has a little less in her retirement plan from her full-time job at the hospital. Despite the hospital's generally better benefits, my company offers a superior health plan, which we use. We also have 2 cars under both our names and a house with little equity since we maxed out the loan when we bought it a few years ago. Here's what I want you to do, said Dwight, ready for battle. Withdraw half of the savings from the checking account and the CD, and put it in a separate account under your name only. I can't touch the CD without Chrissy's signature, I explained. No problem, Dwight said, calculating quickly. Take 33,750 pesos from the savings. Pay as many household bills as you can from the checking account. Cancel any joint credit cards and get a new one in your name only. I still have a credit card from before we got married, I said. I don't use it much because our joint card offers better cashback. Dwight smiled. You won't need a new card, then. He wrote a list of instructions and handed it to me. Go to my secretary and have her call Taylor Locksmith to change the locks on your house. Then come back, and we'll go over the next steps. Mrs. Carlson quickly called Taylor Locksmith, and they said they'd come around noon. I returned to Dwight's office while he finished a phone call. We're in luck, he said. If I file the documents today, we'll get Judge Johnson. Why is that good? I asked. He hates cheaters, Dwight smiled. He's an old-school, Bible-thumping judge who despises infidelity. That works in our favor. If he weren't available, I'd have to work harder. But Judge Johnson was a friend of my father's. He won't mind if I call him at home. Dwight stood up and offered me his hand. I shook it gratefully. Before you head home, Dwight instructed, take care of your banking. I'm preparing a petition for an emergency restraining order against your wife. She won't be allowed to enter your house or come within 500 feet of you or your kids. Since she's with her lover and left your kids there, that should help with the order. It may get overturned later, but by then, you'll have established yourself as the primary caregiver. By Friday, I'll have served her the divorce papers. Then we'll see how she responds. For the first time since Chrissy dropped her bombshell, I felt like I was regaining control. The bank wasn't busy, so I quickly got a cashier's check for my share of the money and closed our joint credit card, paying off its 537 peso balance from the account. I also paid the mortgage 2 months in advance, which took another 2,600 pesos. With the cashier's check in hand, I went to another bank and opened accounts solely in my name. When I got home, the kids were watching TV. I loaded them into the car and drove to my in-laws' house. Sam waved from his workshop as the kids ran to him. Inside, Mary greeted me with a hug. A minute later, Sam joined us. I have something difficult to say, I began. Chrissy is having an affair, and I'm filing for divorce. I don't believe you, Sam said firmly. What proof do you have? She told me, I replied softly, tears sliding down my face. Just then, the kids came in. Please stay outside for a few minutes, I told them. Why, Ron? Asked my oldest, Ron Jr. Because I said so, I snapped more harshly than I intended. Ron Jr. saw my tears and quickly ushered his siblings back outside. She told you? Mary asked incredulously. Yes, I confirmed firmly. I recounted the night before, including Chrissy's hurtful words and insults. They were stunned, and Sam grew furious. I still don't believe it. I'm going to call her and put her on speaker, Sam declared. Sam dialed Chrissy's number and placed the phone on the coffee table. Hi, Dad, Chrissy answered cheerfully. How can I help you? Ron is here, Sam said. Are you having an affair? After a pause, Chrissy demanded, what did he say? He said you're sleeping with another man, and that you love him. It's complicated, Dad, she pleaded. I'm trying to help a man who's suffered a terrible tragedy. Sam's face turned red. Are you sleeping with him or not? We've been intimate, but I still love Ron. I can't abandon him right now. I love him too. That I was stunned. Chrissy had always been Daddy's girl, and I assumed Sam would make excuses for her. Chrissy, Sam's voice was choked with anger, I never thought my daughter would become an immoral woman. Dad, please, Chrissy begged, but Sam hung up. Moments later, the phone rang again. Mary moved to answer it, but Sam ordered her to leave it. However, Mary picked it up anyway. Sam snatched the phone from her hand and threw it against the fireplace. I said leave it. He shouted. Mary was stunned by her husband's outburst and stepped back. I was equally shocked. Silence filled the room as Sam and Mary processed the news. Finally, Sam hugged me tightly. Ron, I'm so sorry. I can't believe our daughter did this to you. We'll help you in any way we can. Mary will talk to her later and let you know how it goes. Right now, I'm too angry to speak with her. I had to leave to meet the locksmith. After getting the kids into the car, I hugged Mary and invited them over for dinner so we could discuss everything further. On the way home, Sally started crying. Are you and Mom getting divorced? Where did you hear that? I asked. From me, Ron Jr. said defiantly. I was eavesdropping and heard everything. I sighed, realizing they deserved to know the truth. But how could I tell them without causing too much pain? Chrissy clearly hadn't thought about the kids when she was with her new man. It looks like your mom and I are getting a divorce, I said gently. But why? Cried Kyle. Your mother has found another man, I explained. You mean she's with another man? Sally sobbed. I hate her. Sally, don't say that about your mother, I scolded, though I felt the same way inside. The locks were changed just in time. 10 minutes later, Chrissy showed up, furious at the front door. You told my parents, didn't you? I'm sure you called me an adulterer and a gangster. She shouted. I thought you loved me. Chrissy, I said sadly, I love you with all my heart, but I can't accept that you're with another man. You hurt me deeply when you called me an unwanted, middle-aged man. I can live without your pity, love. You also threatened to ruin me. How can you say you love me if you truly believe what you're doing is right? If it's so right, why do you care if your parents know? Chrissy looked shaken. Fine. I'm sorry. I didn't mean those things. I was just angry because you called me a gangster and a prostitute. You promised to love, honor, and protect me. How shameful. If you really loved me, you'd accept the situation. I'm not leaving you for him, I just love him too, and I'm trying to help him. He's younger, and eventually, he'll move on. Chrissy, I said, shaking my head, if you're going to quote our vows, remember you also promised to forsake all others. A married woman doesn't have affairs with young men just because they're hurt. I've accepted that you're damaged goods, and I don't want you in my life anymore. Accept it or not, that's your choice. Chrissy's face flushed, and she looked uncertain, but then her eyes narrowed with arrogance. She took deep breaths, clearly trying to come up with her next argument. In that moment, I wished I didn't love her, but I still did, deeply. Ron, Chrissy said in a tone she usually reserved for the kids, stop being an idiot. I'll come back to you when this man is okay. That I was heartbroken, but my love for her had turned into pure hatred. No, Chrissy. I don't know who you are. My wife was loving and faithful. I don't recognize you. For all I know, this is just one of many affairs. I can't trust you anymore. Chrissy's face turned red with rage. This is not an affair. He's the first person I've been with since we got married. He's wonderful. If he's so wonderful, go live with him and give him your love. Or do you just want to use him for cheap thrills? I responded, more for the benefit of the deputy standing nearby than for Chrissy. I took the kids to the backyard and told them their mother was packing her things to take to her new man's house, but that they could see her before she left. When we went outside, Kyle burst into tears and ran into his mother's arms, begging her not to leave. Please, Ron, Chrissy sobbed. Can't you see what this is doing to the kids? I felt the anger surge within me but held it back. Did you think about that when you left them at your lover's house while you were with him? Why can't you understand that I can't abandon him? Chrissy cried. Chrissy, you've already abandoned your husband, your kids, and your home. It's time for us to do the same with you. You didn't think about the consequences of your actions, and now you're facing them. Ron Jr., why? Kyle asked. Chrissy tried to explain to her son, but it was clear he didn't believe her. Sally, however, lashed out at her mother. You're nothing but a selfish witch. She shouted, spitting in Chrissy's face. I had to grab Sally to stop her from punching Chrissy and demanded she apologize, but she refused. Chrissy was shocked and collapsed to the ground, sobbing. Sally and Chrissy had been clashing a lot lately, which I had thought was just teenage rebellion. Now I feared Chrissy had permanently damaged their relationship. While I held Sally, Chrissy got up, ran to her car, and drove off, hitting the steering wheel in frustration. Kyle tried to run after her, screaming, Mom, please don't leave us. Ron Jr. caught Kyle and brought him back. The deputy looked at me with sympathy. Mr. Jameson, I'm truly sorry for what you're going through. That night, Sam and Mary came over for dinner. I had planned to make burgers, but Mary took over the kitchen and prepared meatballs and her famous macaroni and cheese, which the kids loved. While Mary cooked, Sam and I had a couple of beers in the living room. He was clearly distressed by his daughter's actions. I explained the restraining order and how Chrissy had left the kids unattended at her lover's house, which saddened Sam even more. Mary spoke to Chrissy about an hour after you left, Sam finally said. How did it go? I asked. Terrible, Sam admitted. Mary tried to reason with Chrissy, but she was convinced she was right and that we were all wrong. She thinks we're horrible people. Mary got so angry she told Chrissy not to call us anymore and that she'd testify against her if this went to court. As you can imagine, dinner was pretty quiet. The only bright moment was when Sam invited the kids to work on cars with him the next day, which brought smiles to Ron Jr. and Kyle. However, Sally sat there with an angry look on her face and didn't eat. I let it go, knowing she was hurting just as much as I was. On Friday, Chrissy was served the divorce papers at the hospital. Friends there told me she lost control, yelling at the process server and vowing to ruin me. They sent her home, or rather, to her lover's house. Chrissy hired a lawyer named Amber W., whom Dwight knew. He said she wasn't as good as she thought she was. Amber tried to overturn the restraining order, but Judge Johnson only modified it, allowing Chrissy supervised visits at the house without her boyfriend present. He warned her that any violation would result in her losing visitation rights. At first, Chrissy seemed pleased, but her joy faded when the judge ordered her to pay child support, forcing her to return to full-time work. Despite her outburst at the hospital, they'd likely take her back due to the nursing shortage and her skills. After the hearing, I received the DNA test results. It took me almost half a day to open the envelope. When I finally did, I was overwhelmed with relief. My kids were truly mine. I reread the report several times to comfort myself, realizing that I would have loved my kids no matter the results. Even if Chrissy left her lover and came back home, I wouldn't forgive her. She was a bad influence and needed to stay away from the kids. I used all my personal days and vacation time to stay home with the kids. When that ran out, Chrissy's parents helped. Sam and Mary refused to speak to Chrissy until she came to her senses. After a week of multiple daily calls, Sam blocked her number. The visitation schedule was left for Chrissy and me to arrange, which meant our lawyers communicated on our behalf. We agreed that Chrissy could visit the kids on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays between 6 and 7 p.m. I offered to supervise, insisting I be present for the first visit to establish clear rules. On the first Monday, Chrissy arrived in a car I didn't recognize, probably her lover's. She nervously approached the house, offering a timid smile. Hi, Ron. How are you? It's good to see you. Chrissy, you need to leave. The judge said your boyfriend can't be within 500 feet of this house. Horror spread across her face. But he just dropped me off. He's not staying. Are you stupid? The judge was clear, no lover near here. Tell him to leave now, and I won't report it to the judge. Chrissy quickly nodded and went back to the car. I stepped outside, wrote down the license plate number, and returned to the porch as the car drove away. It's fine. He'll come back to pick me up later, Chrissy said defiantly. Tell him to meet you at the end of the street. I don't want him near the house. Chrissy's face filled with anger. Ron, I'm tired of how you're treating me. You didn't have to steal money from our joint account or cancel my credit card. Chrissy, I didn't steal anything. The money was used to pay off the credit card and cover 2 mortgage payments. I wanted to ensure the kids had a place to live while we sorted things out. As for canceling the credit card, I didn't want to be stuck with expenses you might charge while staying with your lover. Chrissy's face turned red with rage and arrogance. This isn't an affair, and he's not my lover. You're being an idiot. Before I could respond, Mary stepped forward and slapped Chrissy across the face. Both Chrissy and I were stunned as she stumbled back, bewildered, staring at her mother. Chrissy, Mary said sharply, if you ever disgrace Ron again, I'll rip that dress off and spank you until your backside is red. If you want to see the kids in the living room, I'll talk to Ron first and then join you. Be careful, if you say or do anything wrong, I'll throw you out of this house. Chrissy nodded submissively and went inside. Ron, I'm sorry for my foolish daughter, Mary said sympathetically. Thank you for standing up for me, I replied gratefully, then left. 2 weeks later, the restraining order was lifted, as Dwight had mentioned. By then, I was established as the primary caregiver and was allowed to stay in the house. Chrissy continued seeing her lover, so her child support remained in place. She was granted unsupervised visits with the kids in public but wasn't allowed to take them to her lover's home or have him present during visits. After 4 months of delays, our first court date to finalize the divorce arrived. Before the lawyers could speak, Judge Johnson asked if we had attended therapy. The attorneys admitted we hadn't, so the judge ordered 8 sessions of marriage counseling. Neither Chrissy nor I objected. I thought it was a waste of time but didn't want to anger the judge. Chrissy seemed to believe she could convince me, or the therapist, that her actions were justified. The first session with the therapist, Anne, went as expected. Chrissy spent most of the hour explaining why what she was doing was the right thing from a Christian perspective. Anne appeared surprised by Chrissy's arrogance. In the second week, Anne gently questioned Chrissy's arguments, asking her if it would be fair if I started a relationship with another woman. I braced myself, expecting an attack on my masculinity, but this time it didn't happen. Chrissy didn't respond right away, but I didn't care. During the drawn-out divorce process, I made some changes. When the woman you love tells you you're not good enough, you want to prove her wrong. So, I had a hair transplant. It cost around 4,000 pesos, and I hesitated, fearing ridicule. But since I was still on leave, I went through with it. They shaved my head and transplanted grafts from the back to the front. I stayed home the first week, telling the kids it was a minor medical procedure. After 10 days, I looked like myself again, and my hair grew longer each week. Once I'd healed, I started exercising and running. At first, I could barely run half a mile, but eventually, I managed 10. I also joined a gym and switched our meals to healthier options. The kids complained at first, missing fast food, cookies, ice cream, and pizza. I found fun, healthy recipes online. Some didn't turn out well. We laughed, tossed them, and made sandwiches instead. Cooking together became a family activity. Despite the pain of Chrissy's betrayal, I started to feel better about myself. On my first day back at work, I got an unexpected ego boost. The receptionist, Trudy, gave me a strange look but didn't mock my new hair. "Welcome back, Ron," she said cheerfully, then eyed me curiously. "There's something different about you." I blushed. "Oh, I've been on a diet. Lost 18 pounds, trying to lose 5 more. She laughed and nodded. "Well, it really suits you. If I weren't married, I'd be at your feet." "Thanks for the ego boost," I chuckled. "But according to my wife, I'm just an unattractive, middle-aged guy, so much so she had to find someone else." I tried to make a joke of it, but it didn't land well. By then, everyone at the company knew about my situation. A flash of anger crossed Trudy's face. "Chrissy's an idiot, or crazy. You're a great guy, Ron. Plenty of women would be lucky to have you. Don't let her get to you." That was the best pick-me-up I'd had in months. Suddenly, I didn't feel like such a loser. Back in therapy, and asked Chrissy again, "How would you feel if Ron came home and told you he was sleeping with another woman?" As I mentioned, I expected Chrissy to attack my manhood, but she didn't. She observed me during that session. I guess she couldn't say I was balding and overweight anymore. That was another ego boost. I leaned back in my chair, waiting as Chrissy seemed to search for an answer. She couldn't say it was unacceptable if she had another man herself. "I suppose if he was trying to help that woman through some tragedy," she said arrogantly, "I'd be fine with it. What if he told you he loved this woman and that the relationship was going really well?" And pressed. "I'd still accept it," Chrissy insisted. "However, he'd have to make sure the kids and I were well taken care of." The session continued like that, within trying to make Chrissy see how ridiculous her position was. But Chrissy refused to budge. As I'd feared, these sessions were just a waste of time. Chrissy was only there to convince me she was right. That was never going to happen. The initial impact of her betrayal had started to fade. Funny thing about love, if it's not nurtured, it begins to die. By the 3rd week, something had changed. Chrissy arrived at the session much calmer and said very little, mostly just listening. Whatever had shifted seemed to have humbled her a bit. Maybe she wasn't as arrogant anymore because I challenged her calmly and compassionately on every point. I also noticed Chrissy watching me when she thought I wouldn't notice. I continued exercising and lost a bit more weight. I had even started doing a lot of yard work, which gave me a great tan. A few months before the therapy sessions were ordered, I made another change. I had started feeling dissatisfied with my job. While I loved fixing cars, it wasn't just the engines. I found immense satisfaction in doing bodywork. I'd been working on old cars since I was 14, and by now, I could do it all. I saw the possibility of having my own business as a way to spend more time with my kids. I talked to Sam, and he agreed to help me. I wanted to set up my own shop and start building a business, but I couldn't just quit my job. I didn't have enough money to support us until the business took off. We'd starve before I could make it work. However, since Sam's farm was also in an industrial area, he agreed to let me start my business in his workshop. Sam's workshop had once been a horse stable that he'd converted. There was plenty of space for both of us to work. If I managed to establish the business, Sam agreed to lease me a plot of land along the highway to build my own shop. I spent time at work studying how things were set up at the dealership. The dealership was designed to handle a higher volume than I anticipated for my business. They did some bodywork there, but most of it was subcontracted. In terms of tools and equipment, one thing was clear: I would need to build a paint booth. Not only did Sam agree with this, but he even helped me build it. I used the money I'd withdrawn from our joint savings, along with a small loan from Sam, to fund the business. I started part-time, mainly on weekends and evenings. It was fun, and the kids often came to watch or even help. I really enjoyed teaching Ron Jr. how to do things. Even Sally got her hands dirty and loved telling her friends how she helped change an engine or paint a Corvette. That also made her more popular with the boys at school. I gained business through word of mouth, and soon I found myself wondering if I should go full-time. That decision reached a critical point when I was told they needed me to work over the weekend to catch up on a backlog. I couldn't do it because I had my own clients to attend to. I figured I was going to get fired when I went to tell Bob I couldn't work because of my business obligations. "You got a minute, Bob?" I asked, poking my head into his office. "Sure, Ron," he gestured for me to come in. "I'm glad you're working this weekend. We've got 44 cars coming in on Friday that need to be inspected and fully prepped. We have to get them out before the end of the month." It stung a bit to hear that. Most people don't realize that manufacturers offer special incentives to dealerships if they sell a certain number of cars in a month. For example, if the dealership sells 300 vehicles in a month, the factory might give them a discount, like $150 off each car, saving $4,500. But if they sell only 299, they get nothing. It was crucial for the dealership. "That's the thing, Bob," I said, feeling sweat trickle down my back. "I can't work this weekend. I've started my own business on weekends, and I have commitments." "I'm sorry, Ron," Bob said bluntly. "But if you can't work this weekend, I might have to let you go." "I understand, Bob," I replied resignedly. "I just hope there are no hard feelings. I've been trying to build my own business. I want to spend more time with my kids and save some extra money for their college funds. I'll clear out my locker." "I hate to lose you, Ron," Bob said sadly. "Tell me about your business. Where is it located, and what kind of work do you do?" I explained that I had set up my operation on my father-in-law's property and described the equipment and tools I had. I was prepared to handle almost any type of auto repair, including bodywork. "Go grab a coffee and come back here," Bob said, reaching for his phone. I didn't want coffee, so I went to my locker and packed my things into a box. Losing this job was going to be tough for a while. The kids would have to be on Chrissy's health insurance plan since I had taken her off mine. Still, I was confident I could make it work. I was turning down almost as much business as I was taking on. Bob motioned for me to come into his office when he saw me walking down the hall. "I've got a deal for you, Ron," he said excitedly. "If you work this weekend, we'll reimburse you for any money you lose due to dissatisfied clients." I shook my head. I couldn't do that to my clients. "Wait, I'm not finished," Bob said, sliding a piece of paper across his desk. It was an independent contractor agreement. "I really need you this weekend, and I think you can convince your clients to wait a few days. If you can do that, and your shop passes our inspection, we'll hire you as an independent contractor to handle some of our bodywork." I was stunned but accepted the deal. After that weekend, I was essentially working full-time in my own business. Occasionally, I'd go to the dealership if they had a problem and I wasn't busy. Sam even started helping me part-time, and Mary agreed to manage my accounts. I was making more money than I ever had working at the dealership. The only thing still broken in my life was my marriage. After the 4th therapy session, I wanted to end them. I no longer cared what Chrissy did with her new lover. Don't get me wrong, it still hurt to think about my wife with another man, but I didn't dwell on it as often. In our 5th session, I decided to go on the offensive. I figured if I pushed Chrissy hard enough, she might choose to end these useless sessions. I decided to confront her about the most hurtful things she'd said, like when she called me too ugly to attract another woman. When and asked if I had anything to say, I went straight at Chrissy. "Chrissy, I've decided that you're not just selfish, but also incredibly cruel. How dare you tell the man you supposedly love that he's an unattractive, middle-aged man no woman would want? You hurt me in a way I don't think I'll ever fully recover from." "Oh God, Ron, I'm so sorry." Chrissy burst out, sobbing uncontrollably. "I'm ashamed I said that. If I could take it back, I would. I love you. Just not enough to give up your lover," I replied coldly. Chrissy broke down in uncontrollable sobs. No matter what Anne or I said, we couldn't calm her down. Finally, Anne declared the session over but gave us homework to complete before the next one. I wasn't looking forward to it because I thought these sessions were a total waste of time. The assignment was to answer a series of questions. Some made sense, like what was your relationship with your parents? And how was your intimacy? Others seemed pointless, like what's your favorite food and drink? Or what type of vehicle do you drive? But one question really made me think, if you could change one thing, what would it be? I had been working on the questionnaire the night after the last session, but when I read that question, I put it down. I wanted to think it over. The next day, I finally wrote, "I wish I had been a better husband so my wife wouldn't have stopped loving me." We handed in our papers at the next session, but Anne didn't even look at them. Instead, she asked if we had any questions or anything we wanted to discuss. That I'd like to ask Chrissy a question, I said immediately. Anne nodded in approval, and I turned to face my distant wife. "Chrissy, I don't see us making any progress with these sessions. You've made it clear you're not going to leave your friend Bruce Horman, and that leaves no room for reconciliation. Why don't we just stop this and finalize the divorce?" "How do you know his name?" Chrissy asked, shocked. "The first time you came to visit the kids, I wrote down his license plate number. After that, it wasn't hard to find out his name. But it really doesn't matter. I have no interest in getting back at him or even speaking to him. I just don't care anymore. I want to move on." Chrissy looked at me with the saddest eyes I think I've ever seen. I hated seeing her suffer, and I wanted to reach out and hold her. But I knew that wouldn't solve anything, so I continued. "I know your lawyer hasn't been happy with the settlement I've offered so far. Well, I've told my lawyer to propose some alternatives. I'm willing to give you more visitation time with the kids. I'm also offering to pay you 1,000 pesos a month in spousal support for 3 years. I just want you to leave, at any cost." I watched Chrissy for a reaction, but all I saw was overwhelming sadness. She had made it perfectly clear she wasn't going to stop seeing the guy, and I couldn't, wouldn't, except that my wife was with another man. I couldn't understand how she thought I could ever live with that situation. At this point, none of it mattered. I just wanted out. I decided to push to end this farce. I know what you said about me was partially true. It hurt a lot when you said it, and I told you I didn't think I'd ever get over it. But as time goes on, I realize, I am getting over it. As you can see, I've tried to improve myself. I don't think I'm the man you thought I was when you started seeing Bruce. I've also started dating since we decided to get divorced. If for no other reason, it's so you can start rebuilding a relationship with your kids. At that, Chrissy burst into tears and ran out of the room. And looked as stunned as I was. Eventually, she composed herself and told me she wanted to see Chrissy alone for the next session and then meet with me one-on-one for the final session. With a sigh, I agreed. When Chrissy had first shattered my world, I was furious and filled with hatred. But now, months later, I was just exhausted. I could see the pain this situation had caused, not just to me, but to Chrissy, her parents, and most of all, our kids. I wanted it to stop. I was no longer angry because Chrissy had been with another man. That rage had faded. By the time I arrived at my final session with Anne, I wasn't just relieved Chrissy wouldn't be there, I was also glad this would be the end of counseling. Ron, I want to commend you for your self-control throughout these sessions, and began. I know this whole situation has been incredibly painful for you. After meeting with Chrissy last week, I think I finally understand what happened to your marriage. I sat on the edge of my seat. Maybe, I thought, I'll finally learn why Chrissy decided to destroy our marriage. Do you remember the homework I gave you? She asked. I nodded. I had almost forgotten about it, thinking it had little value in these counseling sessions. The way both of you answered one particular question surprised me, she said, pulling out 2 sheets of paper from her folder. The question was, if you could change one thing, what would it be? Do you remember? I nodded again. Your answer was that you wished you'd been a better husband so your wife wouldn't have stopped loving you. When Chrissy heard that, she broke down and cried harder than I've ever seen. It took me a long time to calm her down. I didn't know what to think, say, or do, so I just sat with her. And, my wife never stopped loving me. Is that why she's still sleeping with Bruce? Because she loves me so much? I replied sarcastically, and gave me a disapproving look. Ron, what I discovered about Chrissy is that she's going through a severe midlife crisis. As the kids grew older, Chrissy felt like life was slipping away from her. She is, and I suspect always has been, a warm and caring person. At some point, she met Bruce, who desperately needed her. She confused her desire to feel young again and Bruce's desperate need for forgiveness over his wife's death with love. That doesn't change anything, I protested. She still slept with Bruce. Actually, no, she's not, and said softly. I froze. She's not. No, Ron. She's really not. This was news to me. Then why didn't Chrissy tell me? I asked. I know this isn't going to change your feelings at this point, but you deserve to know the whole truth, and said. Bruce left town the same day you told Chrissy you had started dating and just wanted to proceed with the divorce. She assumed she had already lost you. I thought about that, but Anne was right, it didn't change my mind. Too much had happened to go back. My life was moving forward now, and I wanted to keep it that way. I could never trust Chrissy again, and I didn't want to live like that. And still wanted the kids to reconnect with their mother. Sally's grades had plummeted since this mess began, and she remained angry with Chrissy. Kyle had become withdrawn, acting out in school. This was perhaps the worst consequence of Chrissy's actions. Kyle was no longer the cheerful kid he used to be. Ron Jr. handled it the best. He wasn't angry or distant, but whenever his mother's name came up, he'd change the subject. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe his reaction was worse than the girls'. I just don't know. One last thing, Ron, Anne said, pulling out the second sheet of paper. This is Crisy's response to the question about changing one thing. She wrote that if she could change one thing, it would be never having met Bruce Harmon. The divorce was finalized, and according to the agreement, Crisy visited the kids on Wednesdays and Fridays. I made sure to take the kids outside on Fridays before Crisy arrived. At first, our interactions were formal and awkward, but eventually, we started having meals together with the kids. One evening, Crisy asked if she could stay the night. I laughed. The bed in the guest room isn't that comfortable. It's better if you go back to your house. And next time, don't even think I'd ever be alone with you. As for Bruce Harmon, his story wasn't entirely true. His wife died after storming out, speeding away in anger after catching him cheating. She died in a car accident. Why did he leave town? I suppose it had something to do with the severe beating he received outside a local bar, broken ribs, a shattered knee, 5 missing teeth, and, well, 2 crushed testicles. I had to call in a favor from some friends. It was worth it. The beating ensured he'd never charm another woman again, let alone satisfy one. As for Crisy, she gradually rebuilt a loving relationship with the kids, or rather, with Sally and Kyle. No matter what Crisy did, there was always a distance between her and Ron Jr. You'd think Sally would have held a grudge, but she was the first to fully embrace her mother's return. Crisy eventually repaired her relationship with her parents, although, like with Ron Jr., there was still a slight coldness with her father. Most Sundays, we'd have dinner there as a family, but we weren't really a family. Crisy kept apologizing for everything that had happened. Eventually, I told her to stop. I'll never forgive you, and it's pointless to keep trying, I said. Please, Crisy, stop being childish. I've told you how things are going to be. I have no intention of discussing it further. The discussion is over, accept it or don't. That's your choice. We'll never get back together, even if you were the last woman on earth and the fate of humanity depended on me sleeping with you, I'd refuse. 3 years later, I got married again. I married Sally's teacher. How we met and everything that happened is a story for another time, but what matters is that the kids love her and have accepted her as part of the family. Crisy still hasn't accepted that I've moved on. Well, I'm not going to do anything about that. After all, the discussion was over. She can either accept it, or not.